Today we're going to look at a recently released Indonesian horror film, Ghost Rich 2. Indonesian horror films often combine folk elements, and this film we're discussing today incorporates supernatural elements into its folk style. Filmed on location in a remote village, it feels more authentic to the audience, creating a more realistic atmosphere of suspense. The story begins in a remote mountain village in Indonesia, where a terrible plague breaks out. Without effective treatment, most of the villagers die from the plague. In order to control the epidemic, the town sent a medical team to provide support. But due to the poor conditions, they also assigned 5 medical personnel, 2 men to bury the bodies and 3 women to provide medical care. Led by the boatmen, they crossed the river by boat, and after several hours of walking on mountain roads, they finally arrived at this remote mountain village. The village was even more backward than they had imagined. As soon as they entered the village, they discovered a strange thing. Many of the house doors had been marked with large red crosses. Seeing this, Mira curiously asked the boatman why there were such markings on the doors. The boatman sadly told Mira that it meant no one lived there anymore. That is, the owners of the houses had died of the plague. When they passed by, almost all the houses in the row were marked with red crosses. One could imagine how many people had died in this remote mountain village because of the plague. They didn't know that something even more terrible awaited them. The plague had been going on for more than a month. When the boatman brought them to the ward was already full of people infected with the plague. Almost everyone who hadn't left the village was lying here, but relying on them to treat everyone was like a drop in the ocean. As the number of infections increased, more and more people died. The morgue next door was piled high with unprocessed corpses. While everyone was busy working, Mira threw a few brain pills into the morgue to slow down the decomposition of the bodies. But just as she was about to leave, one of the brain pills rolled back. Everyone lying here was dead. Who threw the brain pills back? Mira was terrified, breaking out in a cold sweat. Had something happened? She stared nervously at a piece of fruit cloth in front of her. Suddenly, it moved, and then a rat crawled out. Seeing that it was a false alarm, she breathed a sigh of relief and quickly got up and left the morgue. Eddie and his partner were responsible for burying the bodies. Because there were so many dead, they had to work through the night. Just as they were working hard, they heard a whistling sound in the distance. In Eddie's hometown, whistling at night was considered very unlucky, especially since they were burying bodies. Hearing the sound, the two immediately stopped working. They looked into the distance and saw that the whistler was a girl that in the pitch-black night. The whistling sounded eerie and unsettling. Perhaps it was a custom among them. The two paid no more attention and returned to their positions to continue digging the pit. Since the outbreak of the plague, people had been dying every day. After the villagers carried out the bodies, the man drew a red cross on the front door of the house. But just as he was about to turn and leave, the light inside the house suddenly came on. He thought someone was still inside, so he opened the door and went in. But when he entered, he found the house empty. The man, not giving up, called out twice more, but still heard no response. Perhaps it was an accident. The man turned off the light and was about to leave when he accidentally kicked over a paint bucket. At that moment, a strange thing happened. The spilled paint left a pair of footprints, as if a person was standing in front of the man. Seeing this bizarre scene, the man was so frightened that he fled in panic. At the same time, Xiaoli, who had just finished showering after a busy day, noticed that the bathroom light was flickering. Then she heard a tapping sound from next door. She thought a patient needed help, but when she arrived at the ward, all the patients were lying there quietly. She looked around but didn't see anything unusual. However, as she was about to leave, she noticed an empty spot on the bed in the corner. Before she could react, Xiaoli was suddenly grabbed by a patient who kept repeating the word buried, as if trying to remind them. The nervous Xiaoli didn't understand the patient's implied meaning, which led them to an even more terrifying situation. That evening, Maya was performing a prayer according to tradition when, halfway through, she suddenly heard a banging sound outside the window. When she turned around, she saw a terrifying figure banging its head against the glass. Terrified, she covered her eyes with her hands. When she turned around again, the figure had vanished. She mustered her courage and went to the window, but it was empty outside. Time quickly passed to the next day. As the plague spread, more and more villagers were infected. The 3 medical staff were simply too busy. A little girl approached Maya because her mother hadn't been able to evacuate when the plague broke out in the east of the village. She hoped Maya could send someone to treat her mother. However, they were already short-staffed, so Maya refused. Seeing the girl's pleading, Mira had no choice but to agree to treat her mother in the evenings. After work that evening, Cuddy took Mira to the east of the village. Because they hadn't showered for several days, and there happened to be a bathroom in the next room, Katie took Milo inside. As soon as they entered, they saw a bucket of paint spilled on the floor. Neither of them knew that strange things had happened in this house before. After entering, Milo went straight to the bathroom, while Katie looked at the painting on the table and fell into sadness. It turned out that her good friend used to live here, but her whole family had died from the plague. Just as Katie was grieving over this, a figure suddenly ran past her from behind. Katie followed the sound and came over, but what he saw was a horrifying scene. A paintbrush was floating in midair, and the sound of paintbrushing could be heard coming from under the table. When he saw the thin hand, he immediately thought it was his friend, but he mustered his courage and lifted the curtain, only to find nothing inside. Hearing the noise, Mira ran over and saw Katie crouching on the ground, her body still trembling. Mira asked her what happened. Katie, holding a tear-stained gun, pointed to the curtains beside her. The person was shrouded in curtains, their face hidden, but a pair of feet were visible below. Mira asked a few questions, but the person inside didn't respond. Unable to contain her curiosity, Mira forcefully lifted the curtains, only to find Katie hiding inside. Mira was horrified. If the person beside her was Katie, then who was that girl from before? Just then, the girl who had been crouching on the ground slowly stood up. The two ran quickly back to Katie's house, but as soon as they entered, Mira noticed that Katie's mother seemed a bit off. Although she looked strange, Mira, who was panting heavily, didn't care and plopped down in a chair. However, as soon as she sat down, the woman behind her stood up. Mira felt a chill run down her spine upon hearing this. Who was the woman she had just seen? When she turned her head, the woman had vanished. Perhaps she had just imagined it. Mira was about to return to Katie's mother after her examination, and Katie wanted to see her off, but she refused. Mira had already forgotten her memories of the journey, and she felt that as long as she followed her memory, there would be no problem. Just as she was about to leave, the sound of whistling came from afar, and then Katie also started whistling. That's because someone I knew has disappeared. Now they disappear every day. Who do you think it is? I said it's Grandma and Grandma. Everyone here is like this. Mira had never heard of such a strange custom before. She only heard the whistling, but it gave her a very eerie feeling. On the way back, Mira was absent-minded and always felt that the custom here was very strange. She walked for a long time before she realized that she was going in circles. No matter how many times she went, she would always return to the same place. Mira woke up again. She had been taken back by Eddie. They hadn't seen Mira return, so they went out to search for her and found her unconscious in a bamboo forest. Mira told Eddie about her experience in the bamboo forest, and Eddie also felt the village was very strange. Just as the two were discussing what to do next, Maya's cries came from next door. Everyone rushed over and found that Xiaoli had died tragically in the ward. Strange events were happening frequently, and now even their friends were being murdered. Worried that they would be next, Maya asked someone to contact a boatman and demand that they be taken away immediately. They learned that the boatman was on his way. Without hesitation, Maya grabbed her luggage, abandoned the others, and rushed to the dock. Mira and the others, unable to bear it, planned to bury Xiaoli before leaving. Not long after Maya left, a heavy rain began to fall. After the rain stopped, it was already evening. Suddenly, the little girl Katie found them. Hearing of another vibrant life lost, Eddie and his group planned to leave immediately after burying Katie's mother. This village was far too eerie. Mira wanted to call upon the uninfected villagers to leave with them, but as they knocked on doors, they discovered that those uninfected villagers had already perished in their homes. When Eddie buried Katie's mother, he followed her wish to be buried alongside her father. Eddie dug up Katie's father's grave and made a startling discovery. Their tombstones were placed facing their feet. Eddie suddenly seemed to understand something. Perhaps they had violated the local customs, which led to this tragedy. Although Eddie understood after reading the book, it was too late. Eddie told Mira the truth and wanted to take them away from the village immediately. However, Ark, who went to contact the boatman, did not return for a long time. When Mira came looking for him, she found that he had drowned in the well. With one person dying mysteriously after another, the three dared not stay any longer and ran away from the village that night. Looking back, the village was now filled with terrifying things. The three were terrified and immediately ran towards the dock. But as they were running through the woods, Eddie, who was running behind, suddenly tripped. Before he could get up, white smoke rose from the woods, and then Eddie was entangled in tree branches. At the crucial moment, Mira grabbed Eddie. Just as the two sides were locked in a stalemate, a group of terrifying figures suddenly rose from the pit. They grabbed Eddie and tried to drag him down into the pit. Before being dragged down, Eddie saw a book lying on the ground. The book recorded how to properly bury the dead, and there were also a few lines of small print at the end. Perhaps this was the way to solve this ghost incident. Eddie's prompting, Katie picked up the book and began reading aloud the small print. After Katie finished reading, something magical happened. All the terrifying figures turned to ashes. Without any obstacles, the three of them arrived at the riverbank smoothly. The boatman had been waiting there for a long time. At this point, they understood a principle. Every place has its own customs and taboos. Respecting others is respecting yourself. A few days later, a rescue team arrived at the village. While searching for survivors, they discovered Maya, who had gone mad.